In this lecture, you will explore consumer protection law, the legal protection for the consumer from fraud, misrepresentation, discrimination, and illegal behavior. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the purpose of consumer protection law and recognize numerous sales transactions, privacy, consumer credit, and housing consumer laws. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, is a U.S. government agency. It was created in 1914. Its mission is to prevent practices that are anti-competitive, deceptive, or unfair to consumers, and to enhance consumer understanding. In order to do this, the FTC has the right to enforce consumer protection laws, develop policies, create educational programs for consumers, share knowledge with federal and state legislatures. Note that many states also have similar laws protecting the consumer. Therefore, you should discover the laws of the state in which you practice. I refer you to the FTC website, www.ftc.gov. Consumer protection laws are designed to protect the interest of the public and to promote an even playing field between seller and consumer. The laws advocate for the consumer by providing legal rights and redress against abuse, including fraud, misrepresentation, illegal behavior, and discrimination, preventing unfair trade practices and anti-competitive activities, ensuring truth and fairness in advertising, distribution, and the extension of credit, requiring clear and accurate instructions and warnings, promoting performance, safety, durability, and repair of consumer goods and services. In this lecture, we will look at 4 categories of consumer protection law: sales transactions, privacy, consumer credit, and housing. A 5th category, bankruptcy, will be covered in a separate lecture. Let's begin by looking at sales transactions. Consumer sales transaction laws include the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. This act applies primarily to written warranties. Sellers are required to explain to the buyers the terms of the warranty in easy-to-understand language. Telemarketing and Consumer Fraud and Abuse Protection Act. This act requires the FTC to promote regulations that address deception and abuse in telemarketing. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. This establishes guidelines regarding the sale of insurance and annuities through federally regulated banks. Continuing on, Federal Anti-Spam Law. Any person or company sending out commercial emails must comply with labeling, content, and opt-out requirements. National Do Not Call or Email Registry. Telemarketers have 30 days from the date of registration to stop contacting the person. Slamming telephone rules. Before a telephone company can switch a customer, they need customer verifiable permission to do so. Telemarketing regulations, rules that protect the public by establishing telemarketing guidelines, including telemarketer registration requirements, listing of abusive acts, and establishing state enforcement. Additional sales transaction laws. The Consumer Leasing Act, Regulation M. This assures meaningful, accurate disclosure of leasing terms. Lemon laws. These were enacted to protect the buyer who discovers serious flaws in the purchase or a leased vehicle. The manufacturer is entitled to a reasonable number of repair attempts, however. The FTC mail order merchandise return rules. The customer must receive mail order items when promised or within 30 days if not promised. Otherwise, customers can cancel with a full refund. door-to-door cooling off period. This provides the customers 3 days to change their mind about any item costing $25 or more when that sale was made at the home or outside a normal business place. Let's shift now to consumer privacy laws. These include the Privacy Act of 1974. This protects certain records about individuals that were maintained by the federal government, including Social Security numbers. It also provides individual rights to review those government-held records. The Cable Privacy Protection Act of 1984. This established protection of subscriber privacy. Data could only be released with the client's written permission. The Electronic Communications and Privacy Protection Act of 1988. This established a judicial supervised procedure for permitting wiretaps for law enforcement purposes. Continuing on. Right to Financial Privacy Act of 1978. This established the confidentiality of personal financial records held at financial institutions. The client needs to be given notice and the right to object before records can be provided to a federal government agency. The Video Privacy Protection Act of 1988. This protects the confidentiality of individuals' video rental records. The Telephone Consumer Protection Act of 1991. This limits the market calls to between 8 in the morning and 9 at night. It honors a caller's request to be not to be called and requires caller training programs. The Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999. It provides customers the right to withhold personal information from unrelated third parties. Continuing on. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, of 1996. This established the confidentiality and security of health information, including that it set security standards and standardized computer information interchange. The Identity Theft and Assumptions Deterrence Act of 1998. This made identity theft a federal crime with a maximum penalty of $250,000 and up to 15 years in jail. And it also permitted FBI involvement. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. This regulation was designed to prevent unfair and deceptive collection of a minor's personal information via the internet. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act of 2003. This created standards for handling credit card numbers. It also allows an individual free access to their credit reports. Privacy is an important issue. And in protecting your property, here are some things to think about. Never give out personal information to anyone when in doubt. A solicitor, unsolicited phone call. Protect your accounts and devices with passwords and install virus protection on your computers. Don't leave mail in a box for an extended period of time. Shred documents containing personal information. Store personal information in a safe. And be careful about what you share on social networks. Fair credit reporting laws. Consumer credit laws are intended to protect the consumer from unfair or deceptive lending practices. Let's look at some of these laws. The Consumer Credit Protection Act of 1968, also commonly referred to as Truth in Lending. It requires all creditors who deal with consumers to make a clear and written disclosure regarding all finance terms and costs. For example, the annual percentage rate on the loan, points, fees, prepayment penalties, etc. It standardizes the calculation and the presentation for purposes of informed cost and interest rate comparison of costs. Losses due to a lost or stolen credit card is capped at $50 maximum per card if that's reported to the bank or the institution within 2 days. Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974. This prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, or receipt of public assistance. Creditors are required to provide to applicants upon request with reasons underlying decisions to deny credit to them. The Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970. Access to consumer credit data is limited to those with valid need. The consumer has the right to know what's in their credit report, to dispute the information and request corrections. Adverse information is removed after 7 years. Note that bankruptcies removed after 10 years. The Fair Credit Billing Act of 1974. This provides a standardized process by which borrowers can see and correct consumer credit billing disputes. It prohibits creditors from taking action that adversely affect consumer credit standing until an investigation is completed. Continuing on. The Fair Debt Collection Practices Act of 1977. This restricts methods, times, and procedures for communication on consumer debt collection. No contact between 8 in the morning, 9 at night, no collection at an uncomfortable place, no collection at a place of employment if the employer doesn't allow. The Consumer Leasing Act of 1977. It requires full disclosure regarding terms of the lease, including fees and penalties. And the Electronic Funds Transfer Act of 1978. This establishes rights, liability, and responsibilities with ATMs, telephone bill payments, and pre-authorized transfers. Losses due to a lost or stolen credit card is capped at a maximum of $50 per card if the bank is notified within 2 days, or that cap is at $500 if the bank is notified before 60 days. Credit Repair Organizations Act of 1996. It's intended to help clients make informed decisions about the services of credit repair firms by defining prohibited practices, requiring disclosures, and contract details. The Act also specified liability and penalties for noncompliance. Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act of 2003. This established a national standard in consumer reporting. It grants consumers the right to a free credit report each year. Fair Credit and Charge Card Disclosures Act of 2009. This requires full disclosure about the terms of the credit card, the fees, the interest charges, the payment periods, the late fees, etc. Finally, let's look at housing laws. Examples of consumer housing laws are the Home Ownership and Equity Protection Act of 1994. This addressed predatory mortgage lending practices. It established restrictions on high rate, high fee loans and on targeting consumers who would have difficulty in repaying the loan. The Home Equity Loan Consumer Protection Act of 1988. This was an amendment to the Truth in Lending Act that required additional disclosures and advertising requirements on home mortgages. The Home Protection Act of 1998. This established rules for the automatic cancellation of private mortgage insurance on home mortgages. In this lesson, you learned about the purpose of consumer protection law, and we looked at numerous sales transactions, privacy, consumer credit, and housing consumer protection laws.